My ex-husband pinned a death threat with my name on an innocent woman's body. It was his sick way of telling me he knew I was hiding at the Valenti estate. When the bullets started flying on the Bellagio road, Dante shielded me with his own body. It felt like a dark, twisted romance, until I discovered documents proving Dante wanted me to destroy myself on his stage all along. Let us open this file together. You and I are watching a masterclass in manipulation right now. Picture the scene. It is the poor girl's 24th birthday. Her husband, Vittorio, strolls into the ballroom with his mistress proudly on his arm, a calculated, ice-cold display of absolute control. 300 guests are waiting for her to burst into tears, but instead of breaking, she hits us with the ultimate plot twist. She slides off that heavy, 4-generation wedding ring, hands it over, and drops the shame right there on the marble floor. She walks out, and waiting in the shadows, Dante Valenti, the rival apex predator. Here is the life lesson. Guys, sometimes hitting rock bottom is exactly what gives you the strength to finally walk away. The game just changed. Dante's smile in that moment, pure cinematic gold. It signaled a massive transfer of power, opening a dangerous door to absolute retribution. I am watching this and thinking about the sheer psychology of mob bosses. We have to hit pause and rewind to chapter 1, just to see the miserable baseline of her daily environment. On the morning of her birthday, Alessia wakes up before her alarm even goes off. Her bedroom smells strictly of cold white lilies. Why? Because her husband mandated it. He prefers flowers that lack the messy, warm scent of a living, breathing woman. The bitter irony here is that he demands total erasure of his wife's identity, completely blind to the fact that his own soul is starving in that sterile, lonely world he built. Let us look closely at her morning routine. In a state of pure, exhausting hypervigilance, she reaches across the freezing sheets and finds the bed completely empty. Vittorio maintains a separate sleeping quarters upstairs. It is a literal, spatial manifestation of his emotional detachment. By the second year of being locked in this gilded cage, she learned to stop asking questions. Sitting up, she tries to process her own age. 24. The number feels alien. Just 4 years ago, she walked into that massive estate with a university degree in art history and a bright, burning identity of her own. Within a single week, her personal belongings were systematically trashed and replaced by expensive, soulless garments chosen by his staff. She was erased piece by piece. Pause right here and look at the wall in his office. Her university diploma is entombed in a heavy black frame, mounted precisely like a hunter displaying a stuffed deer. At first, the poor girl actually thought this was a gesture of affection. It breaks your heart, right? It was only later she realized it was pure psychological containment. That glass frame was a warning she was meant to stay trapped behind it forever. Walking barefoot to the freezing window, she watches the bleak October morning roll over Milan. Her mind drifts south to Florence. That was where she actually had a vibrant life, waking up with dried paint under her fingernails. She had the scent of creative freedom on her hands, long before this mafia boss dragged her into his suffocating nightmare. Stick with me here, because understanding her past is vital to seeing the tragedy of her present. In her old life, she restored 15th century frescoes. It is a job that demands immense emotional regulation and patience. Her old mentor used to say, you can spot a true restorer by the gentle, respectful way they handle a book before opening it. Alessia still does this. It is the absolute last surviving fragment of her original soul. Pressing her forehead against the freezing glass, she braces herself for this birthday nightmare. Vittorio has orchestrated a massive party, but do not be fooled. It is an event designed entirely for his own ego and narcissistic supply. Totally conditioned to comply, she picks out a conservative black dress, just playing the invisible ghost. Here is a brutal truth about surviving a megalomaniac. You develop extraordinary observational skills just to stay breathing. Alessia plays the obedient, quiet wife, outwardly agreeing with his strict fashion demands, but internally, she is silently cataloging the fatal flaws of every single guy in his crew. She knows about the severe diabetes of one lieutenant and the staggering, hidden gambling debts of another. She has built a massive mental database of these tiny, seemingly trivial details. It is a tactical advantage none of these mobsters realize she has. Wrapping herself in a sterile cream silk robe, she slowly walks down to the dining hall. The room is ridiculously huge, with vaulted ceilings and a suffocatingly long table meant to keep them miles apart. Let us watch her husband in his natural habitat. Vittorio has this face layered with the heavy, exhausting sediment of absolute power, chronic impatience, and total moral decay. When she was young and naive, she mistook that dark, terrifying weariness for genuine emotional depth. Big mistake. As she greets him, he does not even lift his eyes from the morning newspaper. It is a deliberate, crushing tactic to minimize her entire existence. The staff does the exact same thing. The maid pours coffee looking at the floor, terrified that making eye contact might set the predator off. Without looking up, he casually mentions the birthday party will be at their Como estate, adding that her outfit has already been selected and laid out, complete and utter control. She drinks the scalding hot coffee without so much as a flinch. When you live in constant terror, you learn to suppress physical pain just to maintain a poker face. She carefully asks about the sudden move to Como, and he just smirks and says he prepared a surprise. Guys, in the vocabulary of a psychological abuser, the word surprise is a loaded gun. In the past, it meant cancelled holidays, forced isolation, or cruel neglect. Even now, her nervous system betrays her with a tiny tremor in her hands that she desperately tries to hide. Listen to me. Here is a vital life lesson. True safety is never, ever found in the hands of someone who uses unpredictability as a weapon to keep you off balance. Real love brings peace, not constant, exhausting anxiety. For the very first time that morning, Vittorio finally lowers the newspaper and locks eyes with her. His gaze is completely dead. Zero empathy. It is the classic stare of a deeply antisocial mob boss. He speaks to her with this agonizingly slow, condescending rhythm, like he is trying to calm down a stupid child. He tells her to simply smile and look pretty, demanding total psychological submission. And because she has been brutally conditioned for years, her facial muscles obey automatically. It is her oldest, saddest survival reflex. Having proven he is still the king of the castle, he goes right back to reading, but she deliberately stays in her chair for 5 extra minutes. It is a microscopic, silent rebellion before she finally leaves that suffocating room. Just as she is about to escape his orbit, he drops one final command. He orders her to take off the cheap silver ring she is wearing and put on the heavy family sapphire. She walks out without saying a single word, the second she is alone in the empty hallway. The physical toll of all that repressed panic bubbles up. She grips the collar of her robe, forcing her lungs to take 3 deep, agonizing breaths. This is not even anger anymore. It is the hollow, crushing grief of being entirely invisible. Think about the bitter irony here. For 4 years, this supposed criminal mastermind never once realized that the cheap silver band belonged to her dead mother. He is so obsessed with his own power, he cannot even recognize her single anchor to the real world. You might be wondering the exact same thing I did while watching this. How does a person keep their sanity in such extreme, suffocating isolation? The secret is in the quiet acts of rebellion. The outfit Vittorio picked hangs in her closet like a custom-made straitjacket. It is a modest black silk number, designed to make her look like a piece of high-end furniture for his public theater. She puts on the required pearls and that massive, gaudy sapphire ring that feels like an iron shackle. But here is the brilliant part. Inside a tiny hidden pocket that his expensive tailor probably added as a joke, she hides a secret weapon. It is a battered black fountain pen with a little gold band, the absolute only surviving item that belonged to her late father. The cheap old pen is the one single object in this entire Mafia fortress that belongs entirely to her. She pins her hair up perfectly and paints on a dark, heavy lipstick like she is putting on war paint. Checking her reflection in the mirror, she flashes that hollow, deed-eyed smile, just to make sure her disguise is locked and loaded. When she walks down the grand staircase, she finds her captor wrapping up a phone call. He turns around and his eyes scan her like a barcode. He stares at the expensive jewelry on her neck for 3 whole seconds, completely ignoring the woman actually wearing it. He does not say she looks beautiful. He just complains that she is running late and barks an order for her to get moving toward the armored transport vehicle. The doors of the SUV slam shut with this heavy metallic thud. If you listen closely, it is the exact same acoustic echo of a bank vault locking a prisoner in the dark. As the car rolls down the long, cypress-lined driveway toward Lake Como, she just stares blankly at the passing trees. She is sitting there operating under the tragic, crushing delusion that tonight is just going to be another routine humiliation she has to swallow. It is crazy how the human brain normalizes severe emotional abuse just to guarantee basic biological survival. She honestly believes enduring shelters is just the tax she has to pay to reach her 25th birthday. She thinks she can just swallow the poison and carry on, completely blind to the storm that is coming. Look at this opening shot, guys. The Como estate is lit up like a fairy tale castle, but we all know it is just a stage masking the rot underneath. As they step out of the car, Vittorio grabs her elbow. He thinks he is playing the perfect chivalrous husband, but it is just a physical leash. He is terrified of losing control. And Luca, she just takes it. She looks around at these mob bosses, these high-ranking capos smoking like gargoyles in the dark. She knows every dirty secret they hide. Salviati by the fountain. Lo Bianco, Trentino, with a girl who is definitely not his wife. It is funny, really. Sometimes the people who look the most powerful are actually the weakest inside. True strength is not about controlling others. It is about mastering yourself. Hit pause right here and really look at what is happening as they walk up those steps. Vittorio leans in and whispers for her to smile, and her face just snaps into place. It breaks your heart, honestly. She is a prisoner in a Venetian hall filled with expensive tobacco smoke and heavy classical music. He even has 3 hidden cameras rolling to record who is loyal and who is not. Imagine living like that, completely consumed by paranoia. He thinks he is a god orchestrating a perfect party, but he is just a sad man who has to literally force people to like him. It is a tragic game for both of them, because at the end of the day, you could buy 1,000 fake smiles, but you cannot buy a single ounce of real love. He fixes his cuff and tells her to stay close, and she just gives him this completely empty, obedient nod. This is the hardest part to watch. Luca has completely shut down her emotions just to survive his explosive temper. She is basically a ghost walking through her own life. She shakes hands with a corrupt priest who trades blessings for dirty money, and then she has to smile at Ferry, the family lawyer, even though his sweaty handshake makes her want to crawl out of her skin. She hides the pain so well, and you really feel for her, but you also have to pity the people who think this fake world is real. Life teaches us a hard lesson here. Sometimes the heaviest armor we wear is a perfectly painted smile, and survival means keeping your true self hidden until the right moment. She barely takes a sip of her champagne. Every single move she makes is calculated, completely trapped in her own hyper-vigilant mind. But then, as she walks past an old capo's mother, someone new catches her eye. Look at this guy standing by the terrace. He is tall, dark hair with streaks of white, wearing a sharp black suit with no tie. He sticks out like a sore thumb in a room full of flashy Italian mobsters. He just stands there with one hand in his pocket, holding a drink he never touches. He is scanning the room like a hungry wolf, figuring out which sheep is the slowest. It reminds you that, no matter how big and bad you think you are, there is always someone sharper watching from the shadows. True power never has to shout to be noticed. Watch this silent exchange. The stranger locks his eyes right onto Luca, and he does not look away. Not even for a second. It is a pure power move. Luca instantly looks down and keeps walking because she has been trained to avoid danger, but she is human. And she cannot resist asking the lawyer who this tireless ghost by the pillar is. Ferry practically shakes in his boots when he tells her it is Daunt Valenti. Apparently, he was invited as a political favor. A twisted professional courtesy between rival families. Vittorio thought he was flexing his muscles by letting the wolf into the house. But here is the tragic irony of pride. When you invite your enemies to your table just to show off, you are usually the one who ends up on the menu. Stick with me here, because the tension is about to snap. Luca can physically feel Valenti dissecting her from across the room. She has dealt with creepy men for 4 years, but this guy is different. He is weighing her soul. Suddenly, the mood shifts. Vittorio taps his silver knife against a glass, and the entire room goes dead silent. These hardened killers shut their mouths like terrified schoolchildren. It is pathetic how much power they give him. Vittorio throws his arms wide and puts on this grand voice to announce that today is his wife's 24th birthday. He wants everyone to think he is the ultimate romantic. But the reality we all have to face is that demanding an audience for your love usually means you have absolutely nothing real to give. One claps politely, and Luca pastes on that mandatory fake smile. But a guy like Vittorio cannot just leave it there. He always has to twist the knife. He tells the crowd that tonight is also a night of introductions, and points to the door. In walks Camille, his brand new 23-year-old mistress. She is a walking weapon, poured into a bright red dress with her blonde hair pinned up perfectly. The sad part is, Camille thinks she is winning. She thinks she holds the power right now. But the most devastating detail is the heavy jewelry resting on her chest. Vittorio is using this poor girl as a prop to break his wife. It is a brutal truth of human nature. People who spend their lives trying to tear others down are secretly the ones who are the most broken inside. Let us hit pause again and zoom in on that necklace. This is where your stomach drops. Luca realizes it is not just any necklace. It is a dark sapphire surrounded by diamonds. It is an exact custom-made replica of her own wedding ring. Vittorio literally cloned his wife's identity and hung it on her replacement's neck. Luca completely freezes. She refuses to even blink, while Vittorio stands there, soaking up the sick thrill of publicly humiliating her. He grabs Camille by the waist, raises his glass to his mobster friends, and delivers a line meant to crush Luca completely. He introduces his mistress as a woman who knows how to stand by him. It is pure evil. But remember this life lesson, guys. Deliberate cruelty is never a sign of strength. It is just the loudest scream of a fragile ego. He finishes his sentence by saying, "Without embarrassing me," boom. The silence in that room is deafening. You are watching an entire criminal empire witness a public execution of a woman's soul. And what do these tough mob bosses do? They raise their glasses to the mistress. They throw their morals out the window to protect their own skins. Surprisingly, Luca does not break down. She stays totally frozen, holding that painted smile, while the rest of the room fades into an icy blur. Her brain kicks into ultimate survival mode. Out of all the people in that massive hall, her eyes lock onto the one guy who sees exactly what is happening. Valenti, he is watching her like a scientist studying a rare element under pressure. Sometimes, it is in the absolute worst moments of our lives that we finally see the world exactly as it is. To put the final nail in the coffin, Vittorio leans over and kisses the mistress right in front of everyone. That fake sapphire catches the light, basically mocking Luca's entire existence. But watch how she handles this. She slowly lowers her drink without a single shake in her hand. She reaches into her pocket and touches her old father's pen. It is her anchor. A tiny reminder that she was someone before Vittorio broke her. Every instinct in her body is screaming at her to run out those doors and never look back. Even we want her to run, but she fights that urge. She knows that if she runs away crying, she will always be his victim. The hardest lesson we ever have to learn is that you cannot outrun your demons. If you want true freedom, you have to turn around and walk straight into the fire. You and I are witnessing the exact second she takes her life back. Fleeing would just mean carrying his name like a permanent scar, leaving that fake sapphire behind as a trophy. Instead, she completely rejects the victim role. She turns and starts walking straight toward Camille. 300 pairs of eyes are watching her glide across the floor, and you can feel the absolute panic rippling through the mobsters. They think she is going to snap. But Vittorio? His ego is so massive it has completely blinded him. He is actually standing there with a smug grin, thinking he has broken her so thoroughly that she is keeming over to bless his new romance. It is incredibly pathetic. Life always proves that the biggest mistake you can ever make is underestimating the power of a quiet person who has finally had enough. Vittorio is waiting for his twisted little victory, but Luca hits the brakes exactly 1 meter away, completely ruining his script. She looks at Camille, and suddenly you feel terrible for the mistress. Up close, Camille is absolutely terrified. Her fake smile is trembling. Luca recognizes that exact look of fear, because she has seen it in the mirror every day for 4 years. Instead of screaming, Luca uses her total inner calm. She gently welcomes Camille. The poor girl is just stunned into silence. Then, in the most powerful move of the entire night, Luca slowly raises her left hand. She starts taking off that heavy sapphire wedding ring. She is dropping the chains of her own captivity. It is a beautiful reminder for all of us. You do not need violence to take your power back. Sometimes, quiet grace is the most devastating weapon of all. Look at this scene, guys. The friction of metal sliding off skin here echoes like a gunshot in a quiet room. It is the literal sound of a psychological cage finally snapping wide open. She extends her arm, offering that massive sapphire, and the mistress freezes, terrified, looking at the alpha for permission to breathe. But hit pause and look at our megalomaniac. Vittorio is totally paralyzed, his drink arrested in midair. His eyes are blown wide with catastrophic realization. This is textbook narcissistic collapse in real time. Her voice stays clinically empathetic, totally void of malice. Hold out your hand, she tells the girl, promising it will not weigh more than the burden she already carries. She drops the ring, deliberately closing the girl's fingers around the inescapable, suffocating weight of her own impending trauma bond. You and I are going to unpack this psychological masterclass together. The ultimate victory over a manipulator is never fighting them. It is handing them their own poison and simply walking away. She maintains eye contact for 2 precise seconds, searing this image into the syndicate's memory. Then her voice rings out, devastatingly clear. She tells the girl to keep it all: the man, the name, the shame, and then she severs contact. This is the kill shot, guys. She deliberately does not look at Vittorio. Depriving a narcissist of an emotional reaction is the fatal wound. She turns to the room, politely thanks them for the congratulations, and walks away. Those powerful bosses who were just raising glasses to him? They drop their heads in silent reverence to her absolute psychological dominance. She walks out of hell, unbroken. The left in that hall exhibit classic bystander paralysis, completely frozen in shock. Nobody moves a muscle. Behind her, Vittorio desperately calls out her name. But the sound lacks any real force. It is genuinely pathetic. A megalomaniac simply cannot fathom being discarded, so his brain is entirely misfiring. She does not even twitch. She pushes open those heavy wooden doors and meets the freezing October air, smelling of wet stone and sudden freedom. She descends the stairs. First flight steady, second flight steady, but by the third, the chemical reality sets in. The adrenaline crashes hard. This is the brutal physiological toll of violently severing a trauma bond. She stops, grips the cold iron rail, and forces her heart rate to normalize. 1 breath, 2, 3. She's fighting to reclaim her own nervous system. When she thinks she can breathe, she finds a massive new variable waiting at the bottom of the stairs. Dante Valenti. He leans against a black car with no syndicate crests, hands buried in his dark coat, eyes locked on her. He screams apex predator in a resting state. He calculated the exact trajectory of her flight and waited right where her identity shattered. He tests her by calling her Signora Belandi, but she instinctively corrects him, firing back her maiden name. Mority, hit pause, guys. This is massive. Returning the abuser's name's Eamslip's first step in dismantling Stockholm Syndrome. He tilts his head half a centimeter. Make no mistake, that is not a bow of submission. That is clinical. Calculated curiosity, he is silently evaluating a survivor in the wild. He repeats her real name, drawing out the final vowel. His voice sits at a remarkably low register, a stabilizing frequency deliberately meant to project authority, without triggering her flight response. He asks who is taking her back home. Framing it politely, but he already knows she is completely isolated. He offers her a ride, with mathematical precision, applying zero pressure. Standing above him, her traumatized mind desperately maps the geometry of the courtyard, the stairs, the gravel, the shadows. She scans frantically for any other way out, terrified of trading one monster's cage for another. Because here is the tragic irony: when a brain has endured that much abuse, even genuine safety feels like a deadly trap. And this man's dark vehicle feels incredibly dangerous right now. Stick with me, this is where the survival instincts really kick in. There is no other car. Men like Dant never rely on lucky coincidences. Her newly emancipated mind runs a lightning-fast risk assessment. Getting into a rival Mafia boss car somehow registers as a safer bet than waiting for a humiliated narcissist to come seeking revenge. She walks down the final steps, stopping exactly 1 meter from him. Close enough to catch the sensory details of heavy winter wool and a sharp, dry cologne. She forces herself to meet his gaze. These are not the volatile, screaming gray eyes of her husband. Dante's eyes are pitch black and clinically analytical. Quietly measuring her stress levels, she calls him by his title, her voice holding far more strength than she should realistically possess. She directly challenges him, demanding to know why he was waiting. He holds steady eye contact, a classic dominance display cleverly disguised as respect. He tells her the absolute truth: he saw her cross the hall and calculated exactly where she would run. This radical honesty actually disarms her defenses for a split second, which is exactly what he engineered. She responds by tapping into a version of herself she buried years ago, long before the torture began. She states that if she is going to be used as a pawn tonight, she wants to know who is playing the game. And guys, his reaction is incredible. He physically suppresses a laugh. It is a microscopic twitch of genuine amusement that a man this heavily guarded only ever allows in the strictest absolute privacy. He opens the heavy door for her, his voice low. He promises that for tonight, no one is going to use him to get to her. She fires back, pointing out that his clever phrasing does not actually answer her question. He freely concedes the point. She looks inside the cabin. Dark leather, no driver, the keys are already turned, but the dashboard is totally blacked out. This is the exact setup of an operator who eliminates every random variable before engaging in psychological warfare. Suddenly, the villa doors above them violently burst open. Vittorio's voice rips through the freezing air, screaming her name with raw, unhinged desperation. The sheer volume is terrifying. This is not just a man struggling with a bruised ego anymore. We are listening to an abuser completely losing his mind. This is the agonizing sound of a megalomaniac finally realizing his favorite possession has permanently escaped. She slides into the cabin. Dante shuts the door with the intense caution of someone sealing a hazardous containment unit. He takes the wheel, and the engine purrs to life with a low, deadly hum. He rolls the car over the gravel without a single spike in acceleration. Looking through the side mirror, she watches Vittorio stumble to the bottom step, his perfect facade entirely shattered. He is literally reaching into the cold air, grasping at a phantom. Meanwhile, her discarded sapphire remains upstairs, trapped in the fist of the very mistress who helped set her free. The vehicle clears the heavy iron gates, and Dante maintains an absolute, terrifying silence through the dark, winding curves. He drives down the lakeside road with the precision of a man who sees in the dark. She silently studies his profile, the rigid jaw, that fixed stare. Then she spots a thin, brutal surgical scar trailing from his temple to his ear. It is a violent trauma marker he hides from the world, and he only lets her see it now because he chooses to. She tests the waters, whispering his first name. But then she aggressively corrects herself back to Don Valenti. She refuses to use his given name on the exact night she bled to rip off her husband's label. It is a brilliant boundary-setting mechanism. She demands to know their destination, without looking away from the dark road. He tells her they are going somewhere no one can ever enter without her direct permission. You and I are going to look at this together and decide if she is actually safe. She tests him, asking what happens if she demands to go back to Milan right now. He promises to take her tonight. No hesitation. She turns to the window. Lake Como slides by, its black water acting like a giant sensory deprivation tank. She presses her hand against her dress, feeling the solid shape of her late father's pen. It is a crucial grounding object. She thinks about her dad through the lens of pure survival, hoping he would be proud of her escape. But then a chilling realization hits her. Her father would have understood the dark pathology of the silent driver beside her far better than she ever could. Dante is currently running complex psychological algorithms she cannot even begin to see. Shifts gears, and the pitch of the engine drops to a dark growl. He keeps his eyes locked ahead and tells her that she ended something tonight, and he needs her to know he sees that. She does not miss a beat. She fires back, asking if she just started something new with him. The counter-interrogation slips out before her brain can even stop it. But guys, this is huge. She is actively testing his hidden motives, which is a massive indicator of trauma recovery. He shifts his black eyes to the mirror for a fraction of a second, catching her gaze, and drops a single word. Perhaps. She pushes back, stating that is not a real answer. He calmly admits it is the only one he can give right now. She closes her eyes against the cold glass, fully aware her abusers are melting down miles behind them. At the villa, Vittorio's total narcissistic collapse is on full display. The elites are calculating which boss just lost the upper hand, but none of that matters. She climbed into Dante's vehicle entirely of her own free will. For the first time in years of agonizing psychological torture, she made an independent choice. And here is the real lesson. Guys, true freedom does not start when you simply walk out of the physical cage. It starts the exact second you finally realize you hold the keys to your own mind. The heavy engine surges beneath them. The dark car carves through the pitch-black night, and far in the distance, a single light flickers on a hidden structure before vanishing. Her long-stolen autonomy is coming back. Picture this scene, guys. She is sitting there, totally oblivious that the single light in the pitch-black distance is actually his personal fortress. The car creeps down a twisted road toward the dark water. All she has to keep her from completely losing her mind is the feel of the cold leather under her hands. Dante is driving like an absolute ghost. One hand steering, one on the gear shift, 0 words. The dashboard clock hits exactly 1 in the morning. Then he finally speaks, chillingly calm. "We are almost there," he says. Not a hint of predatory vibes, just ice-cold facts. Here is a simple truth to chew on. Sometimes the most terrifying threats in life do not scream at you. They speak in the quietest, calmest voices you have ever heard. Hit pause for a second. Look at how she immediately fires back at him. Almost where for what exactly she demands. He gives her this twisted multiple-choice question. Decide if you want to sleep, or start with the bad part. It is textbook manipulation, offering a fake sense of control to someone who is basically trapped. She completely sees through the dark comedy of it, hiding her panic behind a stone-cold face. "I will sleep later," she tells him. And there it is, that tiny, terrifying real smile reaching his eyes as they pull up to a massive iron gate and a pale stone mansion. Let this be a lesson for you and me. True freedom begins the very second you realize the cage door was never locked, and you just had to find the guts to walk outside. Look at her standing on those stone steps. You and I are going to unpack this together. Dante's men have been waiting in the dark for hours. He turns to her and claims she won't be locked in. Only protected. He actually expects her to believe there is a difference. But the bitter irony is she already does. She is playing the analyst, using cognitive tricks to block out the terror. Then Tommaso opens the door. Flashing the sarcastic smile of a guy who only knows blind obedience, he shakes her hand. Pulling a classic dominance test, muttering that the house will get used to a female voice. It is almost funny until you realize the brutal truth of it all. The exact places we are absolutely terrified will break us are usually the very spots where we learn how to finally survive. The scene right here, and look at this foyer. Fractured shadows, marble stairs, a creepy yellow light bleeding down the corridor. She maps the exits in 3 seconds, flat. It is pure hypervigilance. The exact same panic response she used to study in prison inmates. She is clutching her father's pen in her pocket like it might magically save her life. Dante sheds his jacket, and there it is, a tiny smudge of her makeup on his shoulder. She sees it, but swallows her words. She thinks hoarding observations will give her leverage. Dante tells her to sit, and she flatly refuses. He actually lets it slide. It is a desperate play for power, but a vital lesson for anyone watching. Never give up your physical height when a dangerous man is quietly trying to control the room. Listen to his voice drop. He pitches his proposal using that hypnotic tone predators always use when they want to fake intimacy. He wants her to stay and testify against Vittorio. Not to a judge, but at the syndicate's private dinners. He expects her to weaponize Vittorio's massive ego, repeating all the arrogant garbage the mobster said when he thought she was an invisible nobody. She stares right back, calling out his game protection for information desperate to prove she isn't helpless. Dante just stands there, cold as ice, refusing to blink for an entire agonizing minute. It is a terrifying staring contest, but here is the golden rule when you are backed into a corner. Silence is a mirror if you refuse to speak. The other guy is forced to choke on his own uncomfortable quiet. Crosses her arms, shivering in that cold satin dress, realizing exactly how deep she is in. Suddenly, she fires back with conditions. She wants her own key, no armed guards in her room, and full access to Vittorio's syndicate files. Watch Dante's face right here. He tilts his head, his jaw locking tight as real frustration leaks out. He tries to push back, insisting those 5-year-old documents never leave his office, without missing a beat. She tells him she will just read them, right there. He mocks her, asking if she wants to sit in his chair too, but she is just trying to survive. She refuses to be his blind little pawn. It is tragic how hard she has to fight. Remember this everyday truth. Boundaries are never polite requests. They are steel walls you have to defend with absolute conviction. Threatens to walk back to the car and let him handle Vittorio alone. 3 agonizing seconds pass. Look at Tommaso by the door, suddenly fascinated by his watch just to avoid the standoff. Then, the impossible happens. Dante actually caves. You can practically see her shoulders drop as the panic drains away. Before leaving, Dante admits how much he hates negotiating with someone who knows exactly what they want. She coldly replies that it is the only reason she took his ride. Later, he hands her a heavy bronze key to a lake room, making sure their fingers never even brush. It is a terrifying victory. You cannot expect people with power to just hand over your freedom. You have to fight for it, proving you are completely willing to walk away from the table. Watch him test the lock. He makes sure she hears that mechanical click so she knows the key is hers alone. A tiny slice of control from a man who hoards it. Stick with me, because this is where it gets interesting. She spends half an hour staring at the ceiling, riding out the adrenaline crash. Over 3 days, she silently maps the entire compound without asking a single question: the library, the office, a decaying old chapel. Then Renzo, the massive consigliere, blocks her doorway, practically sweating hostility. He mutters that he hopes the Don knows what he is doing. He absolutely hates her guts. But she just watches him. That is the ultimate strategy when you are surrounded by monsters. Observation is your quietest weapon. Memorize every single threat and exit before you ever open your mouth. Answers Renzo with zero emotion, totally deadpan. Then a wrong turn brings her into this cavernous library. Just look at the mess, dark oak shelves overflowing, boxes of literature bleeding onto the floor. It has been ignored for years. Her brain cannot handle the chaos, so she locks the door and starts aggressively sorting. By Wednesday, she has mentally catalogued half the room, but hit pause because this is the turning point. Tucked behind a heavy ladder, hidden perfectly behind a thick copy of Dante, she finds a secret. It is brilliant, because here is something you and I, both know about the human mind. The things we bury the deepest in the dark are exactly what control our daily lives. We just obsess over organizing the small stuff to survive the unpredictable monsters in our own house. She pulls out the faded blue children's book with this clinical little half-smile. Inside there is a handwritten note. It says, "For my Dante, so he learns not to be afraid of the dark," signed by his mother in 1992. The camera lingers on her face as her chest tightens up. It is not pity. Pity gets you killed in her world. It is the shocking realization of Dante's deepest wound. She remembers Vittorio mocking the Valenti family's grief at dinner, laughing at their pain. Dante hiding his mother's book is a tragic sign of pure, unresolved trauma. It breaks your heart, because it's a painful reality we all have to face eventually. The grief we refuse to process never actually goes away. It just builds a massive fortress around us, turning us into prisoners of our own broken memories. Calculate her next move. Should she play dumb? Poke the bear? Save it for leverage? She chooses to sit on the ladder and read as the room gets dark. She never hears the door, just the sudden thud of his boots. She looks up, and there is Dante. His collar is open, looking strangely relaxed for once. Then he completely freezes. His eyes lock onto that faded blue book for one torturous second. You can literally see the raw panic. He looks at her, then back to the book. In an instant, his jaw clenches and his iron walls slam right back into place. The cold mobster returns. It is such a gut punch to witness. True vulnerability is never loud or dramatic. It only exists in that tiny, microscopic fraction of a second before we violently force our emotional armor back onto our shoulders. He cannot even speak. He takes this pathetic, hesitant half-step into the room, his brain totally short-circuiting between fight or flight. Then he backs away. He shuts the door so softly, like he is trying not to wake a sleeping baby. It is absolutely heartbreaking. She stays completely still, filing away the data in her mind like a cold machine. Dead mother, repressed attachment, 2 seconds of pure exposure. It is the exact weapon she needs to break him later. She just does not know which version of herself she needs to become to survive him. Cut to the kitchen, where Tommaso is hovering while she slices day-old bread, totally exhausted. But do not miss the bigger picture here. Every single human reaction is raw data, and choosing exactly when to keep your mouth shut is the greatest power you have. Tommaso drops the news like a doctor reading fatal lab results. Camille showed up to Vittorio's dinner with the famous family ring jammed onto her pinky. It is a desperate cry for attention. Drunk out of her mind, she started mocking our protagonist to the mob bosses. You and I are going to unpack this together and realize the tragic irony. She tells Tommaso she never asked for gossip, her eyes glued to her knife. He fires back, saying he brought it anyway. She keeps slicing, finally asking how Vittorio reacted. At first, the narcissist laughed, letting Camille humiliate herself. Then, he brutally ordered her to shut up in front of a rival boss. It is a harsh truth. Deep insecurity always screams for validation. But real authority only needs a single whisper to completely ruin you. Listen to the climax of this pathetic dinner party. By the third hour, Vittorio physically dragged Camille outside by the elbow. Tommaso points out the absolute disaster Lo Bianco, a massive rival boss, watched the Don treat his own mistress like a cheap servant. It is a dangerous shift in power. She finally puts her knife down and begs Tommaso to keep bringing the gossip. Left alone in the kitchen, she breaks down the psychology. Vittorio's fragile ego took a hit, so he used Camille as a human shield for his humiliation. While his rivals practically smelled blood in the water, she feels zero pity for Camille right now, and honestly, it is hard to blame her. It proves a terrifying point. When toxic people start losing their grip, they will instantly destroy whoever happens to be standing closest to them first. With me, guys, because this is where the psychological puzzle locks into place. Alessia realizes Camille is just a disposable pawn to a man who throws people away for sport. Fast forward to Wednesday. It is 3 a.m, and her insomnia is raging. She is in the library spreading out maritime maps of Genoa and La Spezia. She traces the smuggling routes Vittorio bragged about behind supposedly soundproof doors. She is marking a cross near Savona when the heavy door groans open, and there is Dante barefoot standing in the shadows in his dark sleepwear. It is a cinematic masterpiece of tension. The simplest life lesson we can pull from this quiet scene is profound. All the secret intelligence in the world is utterly useless until you are finally brave enough to map out your own escape. Let us hit pause and examine this. Dante walks in, projecting calculated dishevelment. He casually holds a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses in one hand. It is a power move of relaxed dominance. He tells Alicia he could not sleep at 3 in the morning. This is the witching hour for anyone traumatized by a narcissistic ex. But look at Alessia. She does not hide her maps, she leaves her work exposed. When Dante steps forward and sets the glasses down, her body betrays her. You can practically hear her heartbeat spiking through the screen. This is the tragic onset of what we recognize as Stockholm Syndrome. It is that terrifying moment where genuine fear starts mutating into a twisted kind of anticipation. And it shatters your heart to watch her endure it. Watch the spatial dynamics playing out in the dead of night. Dante takes a high-backed chair directly across the table. It is a textbook interrogation posture, disguised by the smooth pouring of wine. He does not ask if she wants a drink. He simply slides that dark liquid across the wood. It is a calculated boundary test. He studies her maps, mentioning she marks ports like an artist. Her response is tragic. She whispers that she was supposed to be a restorer. Man, that hits deep. You see this often in survivors, quietly mourning the potential stolen from them. She takes a sip of the wine and waits. She does not volunteer a single unnecessary word. After years of psychological suppression, her absolute silence is her primary survival mechanism. Silence is the sharpest weapon in an interrogation, and Dante wields it like a master. When Alessia finally breaks the quiet, she unloads everything. She points to Genoa, laying out how her monster of an exospan disguised his smuggling routes as olive oil exports. She exposes the phantom operations and drops names like Capo Trentino. Dante just sits there, elbows on the table, absorbing the intelligence. She reveals that another boss, Ferry, is trapped in Dante's own web of debt. When Dante asks how she knows this, her answer is brilliant. She says Vittorio liked to hear himself talk when drunk, and she purposely left the doors cracked open. The life lesson here is absolute perfection. Never, ever underestimate the quiet, invisible observer standing in the corner of the room. To analyze this psychological pivot, Dante asks if Vittorio ever suspected her of spying. Alessia replies she was just a decorative object to him. To a narcissist like Vittorio, a wife is a trophy incapable of independent thought. But trauma makes you hypervigilant, and she absorbed everything. Then Dante shifts the physical boundaries. He steps into her personal space to study the map. He leans in, and his arm brushes against hers, the cotton of his shirt touching her robe. The crazy part is that neither of them pulls away. If you track the psychology, this is the exact second the trauma bond cements itself. That sudden warmth she feels is not a fairy tale romance. It is a highly dangerous, addictive cocktail of adrenaline and oxytocin flooding her traumatized brain. Alessia finally plays her cards, detailing how cash moves to Tunisia and gets laundered through Lugano. While she speaks, her survival instincts work overtime, memorizing the tiny scar near Dante's temple. This is a classic trauma response, hyper-focusing on the predator's features. She boldly states she does not give passwords away for free. Dante lets out a muted breath, laughing on the inside at her defiance. He steps back, retreating to his chair, and giving her room to breathe. The power dynamic stabilizes. They sit there plotting syndicate operations until 4:30 in the morning. Watching this play out is absolutely heartbreaking. She is a captive, desperately negotiating her own value, just to ensure she does not get thrown away again. For the first time in 4 agonizing years, a powerful man is actually validating Alessia's intellect. She tries to rationalize this Latin night session as pure strategy. She convinces herself he is just using her, and she is allowing it because it buys her survival. That is their twisted, unspoken contract. But her hypervigilant brain completely misses a massive physical clue. When Dante refilled her glass, his hand actually shook. He spilled the wine. That micro-tremor is a glaring sign of repressed emotional chaos hiding behind his calm mask. Cut to a few days later, and a brutal October storm hammers the estate. The heavy drumming of the rain acts like white noise, trapping her inside the library as she continues her self-imposed psychological quarantine. The aesthetic suddenly shatters when Alessia smells smoke. She bolts to the kitchen and finds the apex predator of the criminal syndicate standing over a stove with a dishcloth on his shoulder. The pan is violently smoking. The counter is an absolute disaster zone: shattered eggshells, melted butter, an open wine bottle. It is a spectacular domestic failure, completely destroying his untouchable boss persona. He looks at her defensively, explaining that the chef made dinner. But this ruined risotto was his own little side project. The tough guy facade totally fractures right here. It serves as a beautiful, grounding reminder. Even the most ruthless, calculated people have a desperate need to engage in normal human rituals, even if they completely botch them. You and I must look closely at her reaction here, because it is the emotional climax of the sequence. Alessia stares at this ruined meal, and the smoking pan, and her trauma response completely short. Circuits, she starts to laugh. It begins as a quiet tremor, but then spirals into full-blown, uncontrolled hysteria. She has to hold herself up against the doorframe just to stay standing. Guys, this is not genuine amusement. This is a massive, violent purge of her nervous system after 6 years of suffocating under her narcissistic ex-husband. The cold, calculating survival mechanism in her brain simply powers down for a minute. Daunt turns off the stove and just studies her. He is standing there, silently witnessing the absolute, raw collapse of the defensive walls she spent years building. Dante throws his hands up and admits he burned the pan. Then he does something rare. He actually smiles. It is not that cold, calculated smirk of a mob boss. It is a genuine, unmasked expression. It is the first real emotion she has seen from him in 3 weeks. The second she sees it, Alessia's laughter abruptly cuts off. Her defensive walls snap right back into place like a steel trap. Dant awkwardly apologizes and suggests they just eat bread and butter instead. It is an incredibly fragile moment of human connection. But then Tommaso bursts the bubble. He walks in, sees the smoke, spots the lingering smiles on Alessia's face, and dryly announces that the boss ruined dinner again. Just like that, the tender intimacy dies, and we are dragged right back into the cold reality of the syndicate hierarchy. Hit pause right here, guys. Picture this quiet, little fake domestic life they built, completely shattered, the second 3 sets of headlights cut through the rain. In the mob world, an uninvited guest is basically a biological threat. You can actually see Dante turn into a statue, his whole nervous system getting ready for a bloodbath. He tells Alessia to hide in the library like a good little girl, but she does something brilliant. She refuses. She tells him she is going straight to the sitting room. If she has to be a pawn in this cartel nightmare, these guys are going to look her in the eye. It is the ultimate power move. Because the hardest life lesson to swallow is that you cannot run from the people who hurt you. You have to pull up a chair and make them acknowledge you exist. So Alessia gets ready for war, but she does it with her clothes. She ditches that soft little cardigan for a severe black high-necked blouse. She is literally putting on armor. When she walks into that formal dining room, the heavy hitters are already waiting Renzo. Bianchi and Conti now. Dante does not say a single word. Instead, he pulls off this absolute masterclass in marking his territory. He walks right up, takes off his own jacket, and drops it over her shoulders. He does not even touch her skin, but the heavy fabric, smelling like him and kitchen smoke, grounds her. It is sad, really. He is protecting her, but in the language of these monsters, he is just telling the pack that she belongs to him. Sometimes the very thing keeping you safe is just another kind of cage. I have to appreciate the absolute icy flex Dant pulls next. He takes her arm and introduces her to the bosses as Signora Moratti. He totally erases her abusive ex-husbands. Name right out of her mouth. That is how you cut a trauma cord. But then Renzo, this old-school dinosaur, gets entirely bent out of shape about a woman at the table. The tension is so thick you could choke on it. Dante does not yell. He does not even blink. He just casually says she is sitting down. And anyone who has a problem with can walk out into the rain right now. Nobody moves a muscle. He pulls out the chair to his right, placing her above them all. Look, respect is not something you beg for. It is something you take by making the alternative way too painful for anyone to choose. Hit pause and look at Alessia sitting there, pretending this is all just a cold political game. She tells herself Dante gave her the jacket just to prove she has the family protection. But inside? Hearing him use her real name glued a broken piece of her soul back together. She plays it cool, pouring her own water so nobody thinks she needs them. Tommaso leans in and drops a massive bomb, whispering that Dante never lets anyone sit and share wine like this. She hears it, but she does not react. She just watches these men run their mouths. And that brings us to a massive truth about life. The most dangerous person in a room full of loud egos is never the guy shouting. It is the trauma survivor who learned how to sit in pure silence and study your weaknesses. With me here, because this is where the game flips. Renzo starts drawing the map of the Northern Territories, talking about how the absolute maniac Vittorio thinks he runs the whole show. Dante is just staring blankly, completely ignoring Alessia. But then she finds her opening. Out of nowhere, she casually dissects a mob boss named Salviati. Vittorio thinks the guy is loyal, but she points out a fatal flaw. A narcissist always confuses fear with loyalty. Salviati only cares about the harbor access. Vittorio promised him back in January and never delivered. Alessia drops a heavy reality check on these hardened killers. If you make a promise to a dangerous man, you are writing a debt in blood. She plays their own brutal logic against them without even raising her voice. She looks these mobsters dead in the eye and tells them to just give Salviati the harbor. He will turn on Vittorio by morning. The whole table goes completely dead. Dante finally asks about another guy, Lo Bianco. Alessia breaks him down like a psychological surgeon. She explains that Lo Bianco watched Vittorio beat a mistress, and the pure sociopathic lack of empathy broke him, because Lo Bianco just buried his own brother. All that sudden rage is just unprocessed grief bleeding out. Renzo is completely floored. He asks how a housewife learned to read pathology like an FBI profiler. Her answer breaks your heart. 4 years of keeping her mouth shut at dinner tables. Memorizing the flaws of men who treated her like furniture. Never underestimate the invisible people in your life. Dante wraps the whole thing up exactly 10 minutes later without a single comment. As the bosses walk out into the freezing rain, he finally turns to look at her. She is still buried in his giant jacket. It is a classic trauma response, honestly. When you are locked in a high-stress nightmare, you start clinging to your captor for safety. But here is the crazy part. Dante actually drops his terrifying stone-cold mask for 1 second. He looks genuinely relieved. She just ripped apart 2 of Vittorio's biggest alliances in one night. When he asks why she gave up the information, she tells him she is done being a chess piece. She is playing the game now, and Dante, he does not even say thank you in their dark world. Showing gratitude is just handing someone the knife to stab you with. If Dante had said thank you, the weird power balance they just built would have shattered instantly. So she walks away, keeping his jacket all night. Then Saturday hits. The weather is absolutely miserable, turning the lake outside into a freezing sheet of iron. When Alessia walks into the kitchen, she catches Tommaso gripping the phone. You can see his entire face shut down. He slams the receiver back and just mutters that the boss is coming downstairs. He will not look her in the eye. And he completely refuses to tell her what is wrong. He is passing the buck to the boss, which is exactly how you survive in the mob. But here is the brutal life lesson for today. When the people whose literal job is to protect you suddenly stop talking, the monster is already inside the house. Tommaso finally breaks under the crushing weight of it all. He lets out a shaky breath and tells her an informant called before sunrise. Vittorio went full paranoid sociopath, convinced one of his own guys was turning. How does he fix it? He brutally murders the man's completely innocent wife. And the kicker, he pinned a note to her dead body with the exact address of Dante's secret safe house, signed with Alessia's name. Vittorio is torturing his own guy while sending a horror movie threat to Alessia at the same time. He wants her to know he is a god in her world. Here is the bitter truth about predators. Real power is not the physical strike itself. It is making your victim sit in the cold, absolutely terrified, waiting for the monster to bite. Look at this piece by piece together. Vittorio was not just trying to scare them. He was digging the grave for a massive bloodbath. By Sunday morning, the entire vibe inside the house feels like a funeral. Alessia wakes up, and instead of sunlight, there is just this choking, unnatural silence. She has spent weeks memorizing the background noise of her cage, the squeak of the kitchen door, the guards pacing, the bread delivery. But today, absolute dead silence. Every single comfort she knew is wiped out. This is a massive warning sign. When your daily routine violently stops without any warning, it means your whole world has dropped into a defensive lockdown. The threat has not even shown its face yet, but it has already managed to completely destroy their sense of reality. She walks out onto those freezing kitchen tiles and sees Tommaso completely stripped of his armor. No hot coffee, no fresh bread, not even his usual sarcastic jokes. He looks at her with this awful mix of duty and actual pity, and tells her Dante ordered her to stay locked in her room. Alessia instantly snaps back. She demands to know when Dante became her master. Tommaso gives her this sad, empty smile and admits that Dante knows he cannot control her, which is exactly why he asked nicely. But Alessia refuses to hide. She marches straight over to the stove to boil water. It is such a raw human moment. When you are backed into a corner by a predator, your biology screams at you to keep moving. Standing still when your life is on the line feels exactly like giving up. Tommaso just watches her in dead silence while she waits for the water to heat up. Without even turning around, she demands the brutal truth. He confirms the nightmare. The suspected traitor's wife is really dead, exactly as Dante reported. When the kettle finally screams, Alessia kills the heat, staring at her own perfectly steady hands. Her trauma has actually made her completely numb to the horror. She realizes with sickening clarity that in Vittorio's twisted brain, she and the dead woman are exactly the same, just disposable objects to be used to send a sick message. The entire mob family foundation is crumbling into dust around them. Everyone is locked down, holding their breath. The hardest lesson here. In a game played by absolute monsters, innocence is always just collateral damage. Let us pause right here and look at this masterpiece of a standoff. Tommaso knows she is crossing a massive line. Alessia basically tells him she is riding shotgun, whether Dante likes it or not, and right on cue the man himself appears. Dante is wearing that creepy, perfectly still calmness, you know the look, the one sociopaths wear. When they are actually panicking inside, he flat out denies her. No way is she coming. But Alessia? She drops the hammer. She reminds him that Vittorio already put her name on a corpse. She is already in the game. Here is a simple truth for you sometimes. The only way to beat a monster is to refuse to play the victim. You have to step right into the jaws of the trap. She looks him dead in the eye and refuses to stay behind and wait for the bad news. Dante instantly invades her space, dropping his voice into that intimidating alpha tone. He tries to explain that they are hunting a wounded animal today. Vittorio is nursing a shattered ego, and narcissists with bruised pride only know how to cause absolute devastation. But watch this brilliant move. Alessia flips his own script. If they are dealing with a crazy predator, they need the one person who actually knows his mental triggers. Renzo practically chokes on a laugh in the background. Dante's rigid mask cracks and he finally folds. Life is funny that way. Sometimes your biggest disadvantage is exactly the weapon you need to win the fight. Now Dante tries to salvage his ego by laying down the law. He tells her to shut up and speak only when spoken to. Naturally, Alessia immediately shoots down this pathetic attempt at control, reminding him he does not own her. Dante does that slow exhale through the nose, the universal cinematic sign of a man totally defeated by a woman. She goes upstairs, changing into dark clothes and sensible shoes. Then she does something so heartbreakingly human. She slips her father's old pen into her pocket. It is her anchor, a little piece of who she really is in a world trying to turn her into a monster. The lesson here is simple. When the whole world is spinning out of control, you have to hold on to the one tiny thing that reminds you of home. Let us examine the geography of this trap together, because this is where the director turns the tension up to 11. The road to Bellagio is a complete nightmare, just a tiny ribbon of asphalt trapped between a sheer cliff and a watery grave. Alessia is not looking at the scenery. She is analyzing the total lack of escape routes, thinking exactly like the psychopathic ambush artist hunting them, and she hates herself for it. Tommaso is driving like a maniac, while Dante sits there wound tighter than a spring, calculating every single angle. Out of nowhere, his radar pings. He sees Snat Tommaso about a gray car trailing them way back. Remember this, sometimes the danger you see coming is just a distraction from the danger that is already here. Tommaso confirms the gray car has been tailing them since they left the gates. Dante whips his head around to check their blind spot, and there it is, a lone motorcycle creeping up behind them. In this gritty underworld, a guy on a bike means one thing: a cheap, disposable assassin. But before anyone can even brace for impact, the trap snaps shut. A sniper's bullet smashes through the glass, turning the window into a spiderweb of pure violence. Dante does not even hesitate. He throws his entire body over Alessia, pinning her to the floorboards. She feels him jolt as the high-velocity round tears into his flesh. Bleeding out, he whispers an impossibly calm order to run. In life, the loudest people are usually the weakest, because true panic is always perfectly silent. Hit pause for a second, because the sheer irony here is suffocating. Tommaso yells the brutal truth: there is literally nowhere to go. Dante, bleeding over the woman he was supposed to control, orders him to invent a road. The massive car violently swerves, scraping metal against the mountain wall as the shooters reload. Alessia feels a warm puddle soaking her shoulder. It is arterial blood, and it is definitely not hers. She clinically informs him that he took a bullet. His response? Absolute, robotic indifference. The car violently slams to a halt amid shrieking rubber and roaring gunfire. Then everything goes utterly quiet. The lesson is grim but true. When reality becomes too horrific to handle, your brain will simply shut the world away to save your sanity. You and I are going to unpack this next beat together, because it is incredibly tragic. Tommaso scouts ahead and finds a ruined stone hut about 80 meters away. Dante tries to play the tough guy, standing up to reveal a horrific puncture wound right under his collarbone. He is freezing, shivering from total shock, but stubbornly claims he is perfectly fine. It is such a classic predator move, never show weakness when the wolves are circling. He lets out this silent, agonizing laugh that hits harder than a scream. Alessia and Tommaso drag him out of the wreck. Even while dying, he is barking orders to move faster. Here is a hard truth. Pride is a powerful painkiller, but it is also the absolute fastest way to get yourself killed when you refuse to ask for help. They stumble over loose rocks and dead branches until they reach this miserable, rotting fisherman hut. Tommaso smashes the door open and gives them maybe 3 minutes before the killers catch up. Dant just nods. Alessia shoves him onto a stiff wooden chair in the ruined kitchen and starts ripping away his bloody clothes. His white shirt is completely soaked. And right here, her brain does that terrifying survival flip. She completely shuts off her emotions, turning into a cold calculating machine, figuring out exactly how long he has before he bleeds out. She demands the medical kit like a seasoned surgeon. Listen closely. When chaos threatens to drown you, stepping up and taking charge is sometimes the only way to keep your own head above water. Also tosses her a standard-issue mob medical bag from under the sink. It has everything: surgical thread, needles, and painkillers. And here is where the backstory beautifully loops back around. Long before she got tangled up with these toxic mafia narcissists, Alessia spent 2 years studying first aid back in Florence. Her mother always taught her a simple, meaningful life lesson: if your hands are gentle enough to restore broken art, they must also be strong enough to stitch together torn flesh. By some miracle, the bullet went straight through. She washes her hands, burns the needle over a lighter, and shoots the anesthetic into his chest. She falls right back into the rigid comfort of her training, blocking out the absolute madness of the situation. Dante sucks in a sharp breath, swallowing his own agony like a stereotypical tough guy who thinks screaming is a sin. Alessia is not having it. She gets right in his face and threatens to make his life a living hell if he dares to pass out on her. He swears he will stay awake. She pushes the needle through his skin, warning him that the first stitch always breaks you mentally, because it proves how fragile you really are. But then, her hands find this hypnotic, robotic rhythm. She is not shaking at all, which actually terrifies her. She realizes she is not acting out of fear, but pure, unadulterated rage. Take note of this: sometimes, anger is a gift. It can give you a steady hand and a clear mind when blind panic would otherwise leave you completely paralyzed. The air in that miserable room is heavy with stone dust and rotting wood. Shadows are creeping up the walls, turning the whole place into a tomb. With every pull of the thread, Dant just stares at her. He is using her face as a mental anchor, so he does not slip away into the dark. But the second she ties the final knot, he immediately shuts his eyes. He is completely awake. But he cuts off eye contact because he cannot bear to let her see him this incredibly weak. Talk about deeply damaged trust issues, right? The sun vanishes, swallowing the lake in complete darkness. Tommaso checks the perimeter and slips out the door without making a single sound. Remember, the people who push you away the hardest are usually the ones terrified of being seen. Tommaso sets up a pathetic excuse for a bed in the next room, while Alessia sits alone with her patient, wiping his blood off her trembling hands. And this is where her mind just shatters. Think about the sickening irony here. 2 weeks ago, she got in his car to expose him. Now, she just used her own hands to save the very monster who holds her captive. It is textbook Stockholm Syndrome playing out in real time. She is sitting in the dark, paralyzed by a massive identity crisis. Is she a helpless victim, a willing accomplice, or the only thing keeping this broken man safe from his own twisted father? And just as she is spiraling into the abyss, his vocal cords finally vibrate. He weakly whispers her name. Listen. The hardest battles we fight are always the ones inside our own heads. Pause right here, guys. Just look at him. Dant, this hardened enforcer, is whispering her name into the pitch black like a terrified kid waking up from a nightmare. He is using her name as a desperate lifeline to prove he isn't entirely alone. Drawn by this raw dependency, she steps into his space. The room smells like a heavy mix of metallic blood, clinical soap, and expensive cologne. His face is locked tight in pure panic. She leans in so close she can feel the erratic heat of his breath. All her common sense just evaporates, and her fingers reach out to trace his jaw. It gives us a simple, meaningful life lesson. The thickest armor we wear is often shattered not by brute force, but by witnessing another person's quiet, devastating vulnerability. She hovers millimeters from his mouth, and you can practically feel her mind fracturing. She knows kissing this wounded predator would completely obliterate her remaining emotional defenses, locking them into a fatal trauma bond. So, she actually pulls back. Instead, she presses her forehead against his temple, swapping out a kiss for an incredibly deep, empathetic sorrow. And Dant? He lies there faking sleep the entire time. It is a brilliantly calculated move. By playing dead, he avoids forcing her hand. And tragically, she interprets this masterclass in emotional manipulation as the sweetest act of generosity she has felt in years. Here is a simple, meaningful life lesson. When you have been starved for real affection, it is terrifyingly easy to mistake quiet, calculated control for authentic love. With me here, because this next phase is crucial. She lies awake staring into the dark, trapped in a brutal loop of cognitive dissonance. 2 whole days evaporate into a haze of hypervigilance while Dant physically heals. She keeps obsessively replaying his whispered vulnerability, convincing herself she only delayed the inevitable. When it is time to leave for Milan, she turns her wardrobe into a psychological weapon. She pulls a striking crimson dress from the closet. This is not about petty jealousy. This is a complete rejection of the depressing black mourning clothes she has been forced to wear for years. It brings us to a simple, meaningful life lesson. We cannot truly begin to heal until we consciously strip away the heavy uniforms of victimhood that our abusers have made us wear. She is done wearing the fabric of a hostage. This crimson dress is practically a fortress of severe tailoring. She deliberately leaves her hands bare, and the total absence of a ring is a massive unspoken statement asserting her total independence. Downstairs, Dant is waiting. He hides his injuries under a sharp jacket, moving with the stiff precision of a man who recently faced his own mortality. He watches her descend with cold detachment, offering zero verbal compliments. He simply presents his functional arm. She hooks her hand firmly into his elbow, and together they march straight into the psychological minefield of the Milan dining room. Here is a simple, meaningful life lesson. True power is rarely demanded loudly instead. It is quietly worn like absolute armor when you are forced to step into the lion's den. The apex predators of the syndicate are already parked at the table. The second she walks in, the ambient noise vanishes. It is that suffocating silence you only get in a room full of killers. Dante pulls out the chair meant for the second in command. Watch the micro-expressions. Capo Lo Bianco stands half a second before protocol dictates. It is a calculated display of respect that instantly trips the room's threat alarms. Vittorio, the monster who built this cage, isn't even in the building yet. His paranoia hangs over the table. Every subordinate quietly darts their eyes toward her bare left hand, desperate to see if she still wears his brand of ownership. It brings us to a simple, meaningful life lesson. The heaviest shadows we fight often belong to the exact abusers who aren't even in the room with us anymore. The dinner suffocates under fake small talk, a linguistic smokescreen hiding their true predatory instincts. The men compliment her red armor, but nobody makes direct eye contact. Vittorio is the terrifying phobia everyone is too scared to name. Then, Lo Bianco shatters the rules. He looks directly at her and drops classified syndicate intelligence, paying her back for the simple kindness she showed him in Como. In this psychopathic underworld, human empathy is so rare it literally becomes high-stakes currency. He reveals a rival order to hit, but purposely holds back the names, knowing full disclosure would be fatal. This leaves us with a simple, meaningful life lesson in an environment completely devoid of trust. A single act of genuine empathy becomes the absolute most valuable currency you can possess. Lo Bianco promises to hand the exact details to the patriarch behind closed doors. You can practically see the executives processing this massive shift in the power dynamic. One commander paces over to the window, physically stressing out because the hierarchy is crumbling. Dante sits quietly, cataloging every nervous twitch. On the surface it looks normal, but the psychological architecture of their syndicate is having a catastrophic meltdown. After the meal, 2 commanders walk right up to her to swear their loyalty. They completely bypass Dante, submitting directly to her new authority. It is incredible to witness, and it brings us to a simple, meaningful life lesson. Even the most terrifying systems of control will inevitably collapse the moment a captive finally learns how to weaponize their own trauma. Let's open the file on Alessia and Dante. It kicks off at midnight, the classic hour where psychological boundaries blur. Tommaso waits in the running car, playing the silent enabler. Dante leans right into Alessia's shoulder. It is a deliberate spatial invasion. He whispers into the fabric of her dress, making sure she physically feels his words, when he tells her she didn't have to look so beautiful tonight. Alessia doesn't say a word back, she just slides into the vehicle. But look closely at the rearview mirror, a tiny, genuine smile breaks through, completely hidden from the predators they just left. The dark lake outside mirrors her deep isolation. It leaves us with a simple, meaningful life lesson. Absolute science is rarely ever empty. It is often the most powerful survival mechanism a person can use. Halfway through the drive, Tommaso notices the atmospheric pressure dropping fast. A severe storm will hit before they reach the villa. Dante's only reaction is a single chilling word: good. He offers zero explanation. You and I need to look closely at Alessia in that enclosed space. She sits in her corner, isolated but hyper-aware. She realizes this storm is a psychological catalyst. The violent rain outside provides the perfect chaotic cover for their strict internal boundaries to shatter. The comfortable delusion they maintained is collapsing. They simply cannot pretend anymore. The life lesson here is undeniable. We spend our whole lives building walls, but chaotic external storms inevitably force us to confront the exact internal storms we have been trying so desperately to ignore. They don't beat the storm. By the time they reach Villa Valenti, the sky has ripped open. Water violently smashes against the stone walls, perfectly mirroring the psychological chaos in their heads. Tommaso offers an umbrella, but Alessia takes it herself. A deliberate rejection of dependence. Dante goes full risk-taker mode. He refuses the umbrella, walking straight through the freezing deluge to prove he is untouchable. Inside the dim foyer, the lighting darkens Alessia's red dress to the exact color of coagulating blood. She kicks off her expensive heels, dangling them from her fingers, her hair completely ruined. It brings us to a simple, meaningful life lesson: true. Raw vulnerability can only begin when the heavy, suffocating costumes of polite society are finally stripped away for good. Notice how deliberately they isolate these two. Tommaso asks if she needs anything before dawn, and she gives a flat, emotionless no. When that front door clicks shut, it acts like a psychological airlock. The entire villa belongs exclusively to them now. But Alessia doesn't run to the safety of her bedroom. Her overloaded nervous system is screaming for sensory input. She bypasses the sitting room, throws the French doors wide open, and steps directly back into the violent downpour. She needs the deafening sound of rain smashing against the stone to drown out the cognitive dissonance screaming inside her head. It brings us to a simple, meaningful life lesson. Sometimes we intentionally throw ourselves into violent physical chaos, simply to silence the unbearable, echoing noise of our own painful thoughts. I want you to examine her physical reaction here, or rather, the chilling lack of it. Freezing water soaks her collar, but her brain completely suppresses the instinct to shiver. 4 brutal years under Vittorio's control has conditioned her to bury any visible sign of weakness. She hears Dante approach, but stays absolutely frozen. He stands next to her, wrapping his coat around her shoulders in a calculated gesture of protection. He drops the formalities and finally calls her by her real name, Alessia. She registers this shift in intimacy, but her response is totally robotic, coldly assuring him she will not catch pneumonia. The lesson we extract from this is simple and meaningful. The heavy armor we are forced to forge to survive our abusers often leaves us completely numb to the feeling of the natural world. Let's hit pause right here, guys, because this exact moment is the blueprint of a tragedy. Look at Dante standing out there in the freezing rain. He drops his arm, making sure that bloody bandage on his shoulder is perfectly visible. It is a calculated move to milk every single drop of pity from her. And Alessia? She just looks at him, vocal cords absolute ice, and asks, "Why me?" Dante stares back at the dark water and admits the ugliest truth. He came looking for a broken toy. Something easy to twist, but it reveals a bitter truth we always learn too late. Predators always hunt for shattered people, foolishly believing that someone's past trauma is a guaranteed ticket to their total compliance. He keeps talking, confessing he actually stumbled into the one woman on Earth who refuses to be played. The wind is howling, tearing his words apart, but that specific confession lands perfectly in her ears. Alessia kicks off her shoes, letting her bare feet hit the freezing stone just to feel something real, and asks him point blank if he is lying. Watch what he does here. It is genius, and it is evil. He admits to lying in the past, but swears he is being totally honest right now. He steps closer, testing the invisible fence between them. It is a sickening dynamic that proves a very harsh point. Half-truths are infinitely more dangerous than outright lies, because they feed a starving mind just enough hope to stick around. You have to admire her nerve here, because Alessia completely refuses to back up. Dante slowly raises his hand, stopping an inch from her face with his palm wide open. It is a masterclass in manipulation. He knows if he grabs her, she bolts. He has to make it look like her choice. He just stands there, waiting for her to cross that final inch. She finally caves, pressing her cheek against his freezing hand to find a spark of warmth. When he touches her back, there is no mob boss aggression. He handles her like he is studying a bomb. The psychology at play here is a deeply unsettling reality. The best way to conquer a guarded heart is never by kicking down the door. It is by sitting patiently on the porch until they unlock it themselves. The rain is dumping down as Alessia presses her hand flat against his chest. Outside, Dante looks like a block of ice, but under his ribs, his heart is hammering like a trapped bird. She feels it. Pulling back a fraction, she delivers a stone-cold promise, warning him that if he plays games, they are both going down in flames. Does he get mad? Nope. He gently wraps his fingers around her wrist, calmly agreeing to her terms. They walk inside, the storm slamming the door behind them. Cut to the next morning, and the world is bathed in this blindingly pure light. But the visual contrast is completely deceptive. A beautiful, quiet morning after a violent night usually creates the toxic illusion that all your worst sins have been magically washed away. Into the morning after, the atmosphere completely shifts. Alessia is lying stiff as a board under the sheets, literally counting the seconds between Dante's breaths. 10:20. It is a desperate trick to keep her brain from screaming that she just made the biggest mistake of her life. She slides out of bed and does something that breaks your heart. She picks up his discarded shirt and puts it on. It is this subconscious way of claiming space, a classic symptom of a trauma bond settling in. She wanders barefoot through his house, lured by the whistle of a tea kettle, and just stands in the doorway watching his back. It is terribly sad, pointing to a vital truth about human nature. The quiet, boring moments of domestic routine are exactly when our psychological armor is at its absolute weakest. Dante at the counter, slicing bread and fruit with a manic, laser-focused intensity. It is a massive tell. The guy I vibrating with hidden anxiety. While watching him, an alarm bell finally rings in Alessia's head. How did he magically show up so fast at the party last night? The math completely fails to add up. But instead of confronting him, she shoves the thought into a dark mental box. She actually convinces herself that physical intimacy bought her an emotional safety net. Figuring she can ask the hard questions later, he turns around and catches her staring. The dramatic irony is suffocating, exposing a tragic human flaw. We will gladly blind ourselves to the brightest red flags if a beautiful lie gives us a temporary vacation from our own misery. When he turns around, he flashes a crooked, unpolished smile. It is probably the first genuine emotion the guy has ever shown. He knows she has been watching him, yet he casually finishes the coffee. As she steps into the kitchen, he pulls out a chair. Standing a fraction too close, letting his shadow wrap around her, he looks at his shirt hanging off her shoulders and softly tells her to stay. He does not just mean the stolen piece of clothing, he means her entire existence. He is locking her into his orbit. Outside, the morning looks like a picture-perfect postcard of bliss. But do not fall for the aesthetic before we move on. A perfectly smooth surface is rarely a sign of genuine peace. It is almost always just a mirror reflecting our own desperate craving for safety. Fast forward 3 months to the absolute point of no return. Alessia has totally bought into the fantasy. After so much misery, she mistook his calculated affection for a lifeline, fully believing she was safe. That delusion shatters the second she sneaks into his private office. Imagine the horror of opening a drawer and finding your own life filed away. Bank records, spy photos, and notes linking directly back to her abusive ex-husband. Dante did not just stumble into her life. He spent years building an invisible cage around her. The irony is sickening, leaving behind a brutally honest reality. The most sophisticated monsters do not jump out at you in a dark alley. They build a beautiful sanctuary, and they sit back while you securely lock yourself inside. If the spy photos were not enough, she finds one handwritten note buried in a psychiatric file. It reads, if pushed onto the right stage, she will destroy herself. Let the pure clinical evil of that sentence sink in. Alessia's body arts shaking before her brain can even process the betrayal. Every sweet moment they shared was a total lie. Dante was never trying to heal her heart. He was not her savior. He was just playing chess, calculating the exact angle to inflict maximum psychological damage. She never stood a chance in his game. This entire nightmare concludes with the most harrowing truth of all. The people who study your broken pieces the most carefully are usually just figuring out the perfect way to shatter you completely.
Throughout the story, Alessia is underestimated because she is quiet. Vittorio believes she is decorative, obedient, and harmless. At dinners, meetings, and family events, He speaks freely around her because he assumes she does not understand or matter. This is his greatest mistake. Alessia has been listening for years. She remembers roots, debts, weaknesses, alliances, names, habits, and emotional fractures inside Vittorio's organization. She knows which capo is offended, which man is in debt, which promise was broken, and which port carries hidden money. Her silence has not been emptiness. It has been preparation. This is one of the strongest educational lessons in the story. Never confuse silence with ignorance. Quiet people often see more than others realize. They observe patterns. They notice details. They understand what louder people miss. Alessia survives because she learns to read rooms carefully. In many real-life situations, people who are soft-spoken, patient, or reserved are dismissed. They may be treated as weak simply because they do not constantly announce their intelligence. But wisdom does not always need volume. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone forgot to take seriously. Alessia's strength is not physical force. It is memory, observation, patience, and timing. She knows when to speak and when to remain silent. When she finally speaks at Dante's table, her words shift power between families. That moment proves that knowledge is a weapon when used with discipline. The lesson for viewers is meaningful. Do not underestimate yourself because others overlook you. Your ability to observe, learn, and remember can become your greatest strength. And do not underestimate others simply because they are quiet. Silence can be survival. Silence can be strategy. And sometimes, silence is the sound of someone becoming powerful.